Sir, I'm sorry, but we're fully booked. Cora Williams didn't know she'd just denied a table to the most dangerous man in the city. Didn't know his mother Sol Gi was gripping his arm, whispering in Korean that he needed to control himself in public. All she knew was her restaurant Harmon was packed wall-to-wall on New Year's Eve, and the man in the tailored black suit with silver-streaked hair was staring at her like she'd personally desecrated something sacred. And she'd just made either the bravest or stupidest decision of her life. The man, Do-yoon Park, didn't move. His mother's grip tightened on his arm, her pearl necklace catching the warm light from the chandeliers overhead. And from that moment, Cora's life was marked. If you believe in standing your ground no matter how intimidating someone seems, hit subscribe. Entitled people with God complexes won't. Let's show them that nobody gets special treatment just because they think they're above the rules. Cora Williams had owned Harmon for exactly 3 years. Long enough to establish her Southern Korean fusion restaurant as the most sought-after reservation in the city and to develop a sixth sense about trouble. She could spot potential problems before they ordered appetizers, knew which food critics were trying to remain anonymous, and had mastered the art of diplomatically handling difficult patrons on holiday nights. This man, though, he was something entirely different. She surveyed her completely packed dining room. Every table reserved months in advance for New Year's Eve, while maintaining eye contact with Do-yoon Park. His suit probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. His watch, a Patek Philippe, could erase her remaining culinary school debt in one payment. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Cold, calculating, and profoundly unused to hearing the word no. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding, he said, his English perfect but accented in a way that made certain words sound almost musical. I called ahead. Park. Table for 2. Sir, we have no reservation under that name. Cora gestured to the packed dining room behind her. As you can see, we're completely booked for New Year's Eve. I can take your number and call you if we have a cancellation, but unacceptable. One word, delivered with such quiet authority that conversations at nearby tables faltered. Silverware stopped clinking. Even the ambient jazz seemed to lower in volume. The elderly woman beside him, elegant in a simple black dress with a pearl choker, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, spoke sharply in Korean. Her tone was unmistakably maternal despite the language barrier. Do-yoon's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple, but something in his posture shifted. Not exactly softening, but perhaps a fraction less threatening. Cora stood there, spine straight in her chef's whites and black head wrap, refusing to be cowed. And that's when the moment crystallized. This wasn't going to end the way Do-yoon Park expected. Because what he couldn't know, was that Cora Williams hadn't clawed her way up from Atlanta housing projects, graduated top of her culinary class on full scholarship, and built a successful restaurant by age 29 just to be intimidated by another entitled man who thought rules didn't apply to him. The elderly woman spoke again, this time in accented but clear English. My son forgets his manners sometimes. I am Mrs. Park, Sol Gi. It is our fault for not confirming properly. Perhaps another night would be better. Cora's expression softened slightly at the woman's dignity and the obvious embarrassment in her voice. And that's when inspiration struck. Dangerous, unprecedented, but somehow right. I don't have a regular table available, Cora said carefully, but I do have the chef's table in the kitchen. It's not typically used on busy nights like this, but if you wouldn't mind the noise and heat of a working kitchen, you're welcome to it. Sol Gi's face transformed, her eyes lighting up with genuine delight. The chef's table? How wonderful. We accept, don't we, Do-yoon? Do-yoon Park looked like he'd rather swallow broken glass than sit in a kitchen among staff and chaos. But one look at his mother's excitement, that rare, unguarded joy he so rarely saw anymore, and he gave a single, curt nod. That would be acceptable. Acceptable. Like he was doing her a favor. Cora wanted to laugh. Here was a man who commanded an empire built on blood and fear, a man whose name made hardened criminals cross themselves and change streets, reduced to accepting a compromise because his elderly mother said so. Follow me, Cora said, leading them through the packed dining room, acutely aware of the whispers that followed in their wake. Not because anyone recognized Do-yoon Park. His power operated in shadows, not spotlights, but because they were being led to the mythical chef's table that most regulars didn't even know existed. What Cora didn't know, couldn't know, was that Do-yoon Park controlled most of the city's criminal underworld. That 3 of the diners in her restaurant that night were his security, positioned strategically to protect him even during a simple dinner with his mother. That the neck tattoo barely visible above his collar was a dragon that marked him as heir to one of the oldest Korean crime syndicates on the East Coast. What she couldn't know was that by standing her ground, she just earned both his irritation and, more dangerously, his respect. If you think women shouldn't have to smile and accommodate demanding men just because they are intimidating, smash that subscribe button. Only cowards who rely on fear to get their way would disagree. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Line cooks calling orders, the aggressive sizzle of pans over high flames, the rhythmic percussion of knives against cutting boards. The chef's table sat in a small alcove, removed just enough for conversation but offering an unobstructed view of the entire operation, like VIP seats at a performance. Cora seated Sol Gi with careful attention, adjusting her chair, ensuring she had the best vantage point. Then she gestured to Do-yoon's chair without pulling it out for him, a small rebellion, but one she saw him notice in the slight narrowing of those calculating eyes. "Yui will be your server tonight," Cora said, gesturing to a young woman approaching with water and menus. "I'll check on you periodically to make sure everything meets your expectations. You will not be serving us yourself?" Do-yoon asked, his tone making it clear he expected special attention. "I'm the owner and head chef, Mr. Park. On New Year's Eve, I belong in the kitchen." Sol Gi smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Of course. We are honored to watch you work, Ms. Williams. This is better than any table in the dining room." Do-yoon said nothing. Just studied Cora with that unreadable expression. A man not used to being challenged, not used to women who didn't immediately bend to his will, and definitely not used to being genuinely unimportant to someone. What happened next surprised even Cora, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Sol Gi began asking questions, intelligent, specific questions about techniques she observed, about flavor combinations, about the cultural influences visible in Cora's cooking. And Cora, despite the organized chaos of holiday service raging around her, found herself responding with increasing enthusiasm, drawn to the older woman's genuine interest and knowledge. "This fusion of Korean and Southern techniques is fascinating," Sol Gi said, watching Cora plate a dish with practiced precision. "It reminds me of home, but also something entirely new and unexpected." "My grandmother was from Georgia," Cora explained, drizzling gochujang-infused sauce in a perfect arc across the plate. "She taught me that food is history and love combined. When I studied Korean cuisine during my training, I found so many surprising parallels. The importance of fermentation, the balance of sweet, salty, sour, and umami, the reverence for traditional techniques while still pushing boundaries and innovating." Do-yoon watched this exchange silently, his eyes tracking Cora's hands as she worked, the confidence in every movement, the authority she commanded in her domain. Calculation happened behind those dark eyes. Reassessment. Reevaluation. This woman wasn't just a stubborn restaurant owner. She was talented, passionate, knowledgeable about his culture in ways that surprised him. And she'd achieved all this on her own terms, without compromising her vision or bending to anyone's will. Only those who appreciate the power of cultural exchange will understand the value of this moment. Hit subscribe if you believe food is the universal language that bridges all differences. Those who can't see beyond their own experience won't get it. As the night progressed through courses, each dish more remarkable than the last, something shifted in the small alcove of the kitchen. Do-yoon began asking his own questions. About business, about how she'd started her restaurant, about her training, about the challenges of being a young black woman in the culinary world. His questions were precise, almost like an interview, but Cora answered each one without hesitation, her confidence evident even as she directed her kitchen through the busiest service of the year. When their main course arrived, dishes Cora had specially selected and prepared herself, Deviating from the standard New Year's Eve menu, Sol Ji took one bite and went completely still. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth for a second bite. Her eyes widened, then suddenly grew bright with unshed tears. "This tastes like my childhood," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "How did you know? How could you possibly know?" Cora smiled gently, wiping her hands on her apron. "The gochujang in that dish is from a small producer outside Seoul, a family operation that still makes it the traditional way, aging it in clay pots for years. When I visited Korea to study regional cuisine, I stayed with a family in Busan who served something similar. The grandmother taught me her technique, made me promise to remember it. My mother made this exact dish," Sol Ji said, tears now sliding freely down her cheeks despite her elegant composure. "Before the war, before we lost everything and came to America with nothing. I haven't tasted it exactly like this since I was a small child in her kitchen." Cora watched Do-yoon's face in that moment. Watched as something like genuine surprise crossed his features, followed by something that looked dangerously close to respect. Maybe even awe. This woman, this chef who had denied him a table and made him sit in a kitchen like a common customer, had just given his mother something he couldn't buy with all his money and power and influence. A taste of a home that no longer existed. A memory made tangible. A bridge across 40 years and an ocean. The night was progressing beautifully, surprisingly so, when Cora noticed them. 3 men entering the dining room, overdressed for the venue, moving with predatory efficiency, scanning faces with barely concealed purpose. Do-yoon saw them too. His entire body tensed subtly, his hand moving toward his jacket in an instinctive gesture. His mother noticed the change immediately, her contentment dissolving into concern. "Do-yoon," she said quietly in Korean, her hand covering his. "Not tonight. Please, not tonight." Cora, returning to check on their dessert preferences, caught the sudden shift in atmosphere. "Is everything all right with your meal?" "Perfect," Do-yoon said, his eyes still tracking the dining room, cataloging exits, angles, threats. "But I think we should settle our bill now. My mother is getting tired." Cora followed his gaze, instantly spotting the 3 men who didn't fit. Men who carried themselves like violence waiting to happen. Restaurant owners develop a sixth sense about trouble, and these men radiated it like heat from coals. Without missing a beat, she made a decision that would change everything. "Actually, there's something special I'd like to prepare for dessert, a traditional Korean rice cake my mentor taught me. It takes about 20 minutes to finish properly." She turned to Sol Ji with a warm smile. "Mrs. Park, perhaps you'd like to see my herb garden on the rooftop while you wait? The view of the city is spectacular, and we'll be able to see the early fireworks from there." Sol Ji understood immediately, her sharp mind cutting through the pretense. "I would love that very much. Do-yoon, you settle the bill while Ms. Williams shows me this garden," she added firmly, in the tone of a mother who expects to be obeyed. Before Do-yoon could object or calculate the risk, Cora had smoothly guided Sol Ji toward a service elevator at the back of the kitchen, away from the dining room, away from the men who were now making their way purposefully toward the kitchen entrance. Do-yoon had seconds to decide. Let his mother go with this woman he barely knew, or risk a confrontation with rivals in a crowded restaurant on the busiest night of the year with civilians everywhere. He made a decision that surprised even him. He let them go. Then he turned to face whatever was coming, his expression settling into something cold and empty, the face he wore when business needed to be handled. If you believe that sometimes the most courageous act is protecting strangers without even knowing why they need protection, hit that subscribe button. Only those who turn a blind eye to others in danger will scroll past. On the rooftop, with the city lights spread before them like a constellation of earthbound stars and distant fireworks beginning to bloom in the sky, Sol Ji took Cora's hand. "My son is not who you think he is," she said quietly. "I don't think anything about your son, Mrs. Park," Cora replied carefully. "I don't know him." "But you will," the elderly woman said with surprising certainty, her grip tightening. "And when you do, remember this moment. Remember that he let you take me away to safety while he stayed to face danger alone. Remember that he could have used me as a shield, could have prioritized his own safety, but he chose to stand alone. That tells you everything about the man he is underneath everything else. Cora frowned, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. I don't understand. You don't need to. Not yet. Sol Gi moved through the small rooftop garden, touching herbs with knowing fingers. You grow perilla and Korean mint. These are not common in American gardens. I try to grow what I can't easily buy, Cora explained, still trying to process the older woman's cryptic warning. Authentic ingredients make all the difference in the final dish. Yes, Sol Gi said thoughtfully, crushing a perilla leaf between her fingers and inhaling deeply. Authenticity makes all the difference. In food. In business. In people. Is everything all right? She asked carefully, her eyes scanning Do-yoon's face, his hands, looking for signs of violence. Perfect, Do-yoon said, rising smoothly to take his mother's arm. But I'm afraid we must leave now. How much do I owe you for this exceptional meal? Cora named a price, generous but fair for the special treatment and the custom menu. Do-yoon didn't even blink, counting out cash from a money clip that contained more bills than Cora typically saw in a month. Keep the change, he said, handing her nearly 3 times what she quoted, along with a heavy cream-colored business card. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. Their fingers touched during the exchange, and Cora swore she felt something electric pass between them. A recognition, perhaps. Or a warning. Happy New Year, Mr. Park, Cora said, pocketing the card without looking at it. Mrs. Park, it was truly an honor to cook for you. The honor was ours, Sol Gi said, reaching up to pat Cora's cheek in a surprisingly maternal gesture. We will see you again soon. I am certain of it. As they left through the kitchen service exit, Do-yoon's hand protective at his mother's elbow, his eyes scanning corners and shadows, Cora returned to the organized chaos of her restaurant, trying to make sense of the strange evening. It wasn't until hours later, after the last customers had left, after the champagne toast with her exhausted staff at midnight, after the kitchen was cleaned and prepped to her exacting standards, that she remembered the card in her pocket. It wasn't a business card. Not exactly. Just heavy cream cardstock with a single phone number embossed in black ink. No name. No company. No context. Just 10 digits that would change her life forever. Truth is the foundation of any relationship worth having. Subscribe if you believe that starting with secrets only guarantees ending with regrets. Liars won't hit that button. 3 days passed before curiosity consumed Cora. 3 days of running her restaurant, of trying to forget the intensity of Do-yoon's gaze, of wondering what Sol Gi had meant by her cryptic warnings. 3 days of telling herself that getting involved with a man who clearly had dangerous connections was the stupidest idea imaginable. But that New Year's Eve kept replaying in her mind. Not the threat of violence or the mysterious men who vanished. What haunted her was something else entirely, the moment Sol Gi had tasted the gochujang glazed short ribs. Cora had prepared a special tasting menu that night, deviating from the standard service. She'd watched from the pass as Yui delivered the main course, short ribs braised for hours in gochujang, brown sugar, and soy, glazed until they glistened like polished mahogany, served over Carolina gold rice grits she'd cooked with dashida and finished with a pat of cultured butter. Collard greens on the side, kimchi braised until they married Korean funk with southern soul. Sol Gi had lifted her fork with the careful precision of someone performing a ritual. The first bite entered her mouth, and she went completely still. Then her eyes filled with tears that spilled over despite her elegant composure, tracking down her cheeks and catching the warm kitchen light. I'm sorry, Sol Gi had whispered, setting down her fork with trembling hands. I'm sorry, this is embarrassing. No, Cora had said immediately, coming around the pass to crouch beside the older woman's chair. No, please. Tell me what you're tasting. And Sol Gi did. Through her tears, she told stories about Busan, about a tiny apartment with a single burner where she'd cooked for her young son while her husband worked brutal hours building something from nothing. About her mother's hands teaching her to balance flavors, About the market near their home where she'd buy gochujang from the same woman every week. About the day they'd left Korea with 2 suitcases and a child who didn't understand why everything was changing. 40 years, Sol-ji said softly. 40 years since I've tasted something that remembered home this clearly. How did you know? How did you capture something I thought I'd lost forever? Cora had glanced up to find Do-yoon watching her hands, not his mother's tears, but Cora's hands as they rested gently on the table near Sol-ji's. Something in his expression made her chest tighten. Food is memory made tangible, Cora explained quietly. I don't just cook to feed people. I cook to bridge the distances between who we were and who we've become. Between the homes we left and the homes we're building. Your son told me you were from Busan. I trained there for 3 months, learned from grandmothers who still make gochujang in clay pots the way their mothers taught them. I wanted to give you something that tasted like the truth of where you came from. For the first time that evening, maybe the first time in years, Do-yoon saw his mother smile without sadness lurking behind it. Pure joy, uncomplicated by loss or longing. Just happiness, simple and whole. When they left that night, after Sol-ji had embraced Cora like a daughter and whispered promises to return, Do-yoon lingered for a moment at the kitchen pass. The dining room had finally emptied, staff breaking down stations around them. He reached into his jacket and placed something on the metal prep table between them. A business card, cream-colored and heavy, embossed with a single phone number. No name. No company. No context. Thank you, he said simply. For my mother. Then he was gone, leaving Cora staring at 10 digits that felt like a door she wasn't sure she should open. The card stayed in Cora's chef's coat pocket for 3 days, growing soft at the edges from her fingers unconsciously tracing the embossed numbers during service. She told herself she wouldn't call. Told herself that whatever world Do-yoon Park inhabited was none of her business. Told herself that the best thing she could do was forget that New Year's Eve ever happened. Then they walked into her restaurant during Tuesday lunch service. 2 men in expensive suits, the kind of expensive that screamed money but not taste, all flash and sharp edges. They didn't speak to Yuki at the hostess stand, didn't wait to be seated. Just walked past her like she was furniture, past the carefully arranged tables where regular customers were enjoying their meals, and sat themselves at a prime window table. Cora noticed them immediately from the kitchen. The way they moved was wrong, too purposeful, too aware of their surroundings. Predators marking territory. She'd grown up around men like this, men who used intimidation the way other people use conversation. Yuki, she called through the pass, keeping her voice steady. Table 12. Did they have a reservation? They just sat down, Yuki said, her voice tight with anxiety. They didn't even look at me. Cora wiped her hands on her apron and pushed through the kitchen doors into the dining room. The lunch crowd was light, mostly business lunches and a few regulars who came in weekly. Quiet. Civilized. Everything these 2 men were not. They weren't looking at menus. Weren't looking at their phones. Just sitting there, watching the kitchen through the pass with the patient focus of men who had all the time in the world and knew exactly what they were doing. Cora approached their table, her spine straight, her voice professional. Gentlemen, I'm afraid that table was reserved for 12:30. If you'd like to wait at the bar, I can. We're not eating, the younger one said. He was maybe 30, with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. His companion, older, heavier, with scarred knuckles resting on the white tablecloth, said nothing. Then I'll have to ask you to leave, Cora said evenly. This is a restaurant, not a lounge. The younger one's smile widened. We just wanted to see the place everyone's talking about. The place where Do-yoon Park sat in a kitchen like a common customer. He leaned back in his chair, still watching her with that empty smile. Tell Do-yoon his mother looked well the other night. Beautiful hanbok. Pearl necklace. Tell him we know where to find her. The temperature in Cora's chest dropped 10 degrees. Tell him the next time we see her, we'll make sure to say hello properly. They stood in perfect synchronization, buttoning their suit jackets with practiced ease. The older one finally spoke, his voice like gravel scraped over concrete. Nice place you have here. Be a shame if anything happened to it. Then they were gone, walking out past confused diners and a trembling Yuki, leaving Cora standing in the middle of her restaurant with ice spreading through her veins. If you believe that threats against innocent people reveal nothing but cowardice, hit subscribe. Only bullies who target the vulnerable will keep scrolling. That night, after her staff had gone home and the kitchen was spotless and silent, Cora sat alone at the bar. The embossed card lay on the polished wood in front of her, the numbers seeming to glow in the dim light from the street outside. She told herself she was calling to warn him. To tell him that his enemies, because they were clearly his enemies, knew about his mother, about Harmon, about that New Year's Eve dinner. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She was calling because she'd seen Sol Ji's face when she tasted that dish. Because Do-yoon had let her take his mother to safety while he faced danger alone. Because something in his eyes when he placed that card on her prep table had looked like a man reaching for a lifeline he didn't think he deserved. Cora picked up her phone and dialed before she could change her mind. He answered on the first ring. I was beginning to think you wouldn't call. No hello. No introduction. Just that voice, low and controlled, with a slight accent that made certain syllables sound almost musical, cutting through the darkness of her empty restaurant like a blade. Cora's spine straightened involuntarily, her grip tightening on the phone. Outside, the city hummed with late-night traffic, but inside Harmon, the silence felt absolute. Heavy, like the air before a storm. 2 men came to my restaurant today, she said, skipping past pleasantries because this wasn't a pleasant conversation. During lunch service. They sat at a table without ordering, without speaking to my hostess. They just watched. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence, she could hear him breathing, could almost feel him calculating, processing. Describe them, Do-yoon said finally. His voice had changed, gone colder. Emptier. Late 20s and maybe 4 to 5. Expensive suits. The younger one had slicked back hair, smiled like a shark. The older one had scarred knuckles and didn't say anything until they were leaving. Cora paused, her heart hammering against her ribs. They said to tell you that your mother looked well the other night. That they know where to find her. The silence stretched longer this time. 5 seconds. 10. Cora counted them in the pounding of her pulse. Did they touch you? Do-yoon's voice was barely above a whisper, but something in it made the hair on her arms stand up. Did they put their hands on you or any of your staff? No. They just. Did they threaten you directly? Say your name? Make any specific statements about what they would do? No, but. She heard him exhale, long and slow, like he'd been holding his breath underwater. Good. That's good. Good. Cora stood from her bar stool, anger suddenly burning through the fear. They threatened your mother. They came into my restaurant and made it very clear that. I know exactly what they made clear. His voice cut through her words like a knife through silk. And I will handle it. Handle it how? That's not your concern. The hell it isn't. Cora's voice echoed in the empty dining room. They came to my restaurant. They sat at my tables. They threatened someone She stopped, catching herself. Someone who was kind to me. Another pause. When Do-yoon spoke again, something in his voice had shifted. Not softer, but perhaps less distant. Tomorrow, a team will come to install a security system. Cameras, reinforced locks, panic buttons. Don't refuse them. My mother hasn't stopped talking about your food, about your kindness. I won't let anyone use that against you. I don't want your security system. I want to understand what's happening. Understanding won't keep you safe. Cora pressed her palm against the cool bar top, steadying herself. The question came out before she could stop it. Why is everyone so afraid of you? The silence that followed felt different. Heavier. Like he was weighing whether to answer honestly or hang up. Because I've given them reason to be, he said finally. His voice was quiet, almost resigned. I've done things that make men cross the street when they see me coming. I built a reputation on being the man you don't cross, the name you don't say out loud unless you're certain you can't be heard.
And me?
You? Something that might have been a laugh, bitter and brief. You're the first person in 10 years who's looked at me and seen just a man who was rude enough to show up without a reservation. You're the first person who's treated me like I'm nobody special.
Cora's chest tightened.
Maybe that's because you're not. Maybe, Do-yoon said softly. Or maybe you just don't know enough to be afraid yet. The line went dead before she could respond, leaving Cora alone in the darkness with a dial tone and the certain knowledge that she'd just crossed a threshold she could never walk back through. Only those who understand that curiosity and courage are two sides of the same dangerous coin will keep reading. Hit subscribe if you believe some doors should be opened even when you know what's waiting on the other side. Park International occupied the top 3 floors of a 60-story building in the financial district, all steel and glass and understated wealth. The kind of building where even the elevator buttons felt expensive, where the security in the lobby was more intensive than most government buildings, and where everyone moved with the quiet efficiency of people who knew exactly how much their time was worth. Cora had received a text that morning, a simple address and 2 p.m. with no signature. She'd almost ignored it, almost convinced herself that whatever this was needed to end before it truly began. But the security team had arrived at Harmon at dawn exactly as promised, professional, thorough, asking no questions, and by the time they'd finished installing cameras and reinforced locks, she'd already decided she was going. The receptionist on the 50th floor looked like she belonged on a runway rather than behind a desk. "Ms. Williams," she said with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes.
"Mr. Park is expecting you."
"This way, please." The private elevator to the top floor required a key card. The doors opened directly into Do-yoon's office, not a hallway, not a waiting room, just straight into a space that occupied the entire floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, making Cora feel like she was standing in the sky itself. Do-yoon stood with his back to the elevator, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He turned as she entered, and Cora's breath caught despite herself. Tattoos covered both arms from wrist to shoulder, intricate, beautiful, and unmistakably deliberate. Traditional Korean guardian imagery, dragons and tigers rendered in black and gray, their scales and fur so detailed they seemed to move in the light. But mixed among the traditional work was something darker. Characters she didn't recognize, geometric patterns that looked almost like scars given artistic form, a dragon that curved from his left shoulder blade and disappeared beneath his collar, its mouth open in a silent roar. He caught her staring and stopped rolling down his sleeves. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the expensive minimalist space, a chef from Atlanta Projects and a man whose office could buy her restaurant 10 times over. "The man I was," Do-yoon said quietly, "permanently marked on the man I'm trying to become." Cora found her voice. "And which man am I talking to right now?" Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "I'm hoping you can help me figure that out." He gestured to a seating area near the windows, leather chairs that probably cost more than her entire dining room. "Thank you for coming. I know you didn't have to." "Your text wasn't exactly a request. It was an invitation. There's a difference." He sat, and Cora noticed how carefully he moved, like a man constantly aware of his own capacity for violence. "My mother's birthday is in 3 weeks. She hasn't stopped talking about your cooking, about how you made her taste her childhood again. I'd like to hire you to design a private menu for her birthday dinner." "I don't do private chef work anymore," Cora said automatically, even though they both knew she'd already decided to say yes. "I'll pay you what you'd make in a month at Harmon. For one evening." "That's not." Cora stopped, studying his face. "What do you actually do, Do-yoon? And don't tell me import-export. Men don't get tattoos like that running a legitimate business." His smile was sharp enough to cut. "I facilitate agreements between parties who prefer to avoid official channels. I provide services that exist in the spaces between laws. I help people solve problems that can't be solved through conventional means." "You're a criminal." "I'm a businessman who understands that the world operates on multiple levels. Some visible, some not.
Cora leaned back in her chair, watching him carefully.
The sunlight through the windows cast shadows across his tattooed arms, making the dragons seem to writhe. And the men who came to my restaurant? What level do they operate on? A level I'm trying to leave behind. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. Which is why they are making moves now, while they think I'm vulnerable. While they think caring about something makes me weak. Does it? I don't know yet, Duyun said softly. But I'd like to find out. If you believe that transformation requires facing what you've been, not running from it, hit subscribe. Only those afraid of their own past will keep scrolling. The cafe was tucked into a neighborhood Cora rarely visited, quiet, residential, the kind of place where regulars knew each other's orders and strangers were noticed. Sol Gi had recommended it, Duyun texted. Neutral ground where neither of them had the advantage of territory. He was already there when Cora arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups steaming between his hands. He traded his expensive suits for dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less.
More human.
Oat milk latte with an extra shot, he said, pushing 1 cup toward her as she sat. You mentioned it was your regular order. After the security installation. Cora wrapped her hands around the warm cup, surprised he'd remembered a throwaway comment she'd made to one of his security team. You pay attention. I pay attention to everything about you. Not flotation. Just fact, delivered in that careful voice that made simple statements sound like confessions. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe humming with quiet conversation around them.
Neither of them drank their coffee.
It grew cold between them like a buffer, like something they could look at instead of each other when the truths got too heavy. Tell me how you got here, Duyun said finally. A 29-year-old black woman owning the most sought-after restaurant in the city. That's not a common story. Cora studied him across the table. This man with dragons on his arms and blood in his past, asking about her life like it mattered.
Like she mattered.
Culinary school on scholarships and loans that'll take me another decade to pay off. My grandmother taught me to cook, but she taught me soul food, comfort food. I had to learn technique somewhere else. So you went to Paris.
So I went to Paris and worked triple shifts to prove I belonged there.
I was often the only black woman in professional kitchens that looked at me like I was a diversity hire, like I couldn't possibly understand the difference between a brunette and a julienne.
She smiled without humor.
I had to be twice as good for half the recognition. When I came back, I found a failing bistro in a neighborhood people said would never support fine dining. I bought it with everything I had and built Harmon from nothing. And now men like me bring our problems to your door.
Duyun's jaw tightened.
I'm sorry for that. Tell me your story, Cora said instead of accepting the apology. How does someone become what you are?
He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer.
His fingers traced the rim of his untouched cup, around and around, like he was trying to find the right starting point for a story with no good beginning. My father built an empire from nothing, he said finally. Came to this country with empty pockets and a willingness to do what others wouldn't.
By the time I was 10, we lived in a mansion.
By the time I was 15, I understood what paid for it. He looked up, his eyes dark and distant.
He died when I was 22.
A rival faction. I inherited everything. The businesses, the territory, the obligations.
The enemies.
You could have walked away. I had a younger brother.
Jae-sung.
17 years old and brilliant, wanted to be a doctor more than anything. Duyun's voice went soft, almost tender. The only way to keep him safe, to let him escape, was to become what they feared.
To make decisions in blood that can't be unmade.
To be the monster so convincingly that no one would dare touch what was mine. Where is he now?
Medical school in California. 3rd year.
He won't return my calls. The pain in those words was raw, unguarded.
He made it out.
That's what matters. Cora reached across the table before she could stop herself, her fingers brushing his. You're trying to leave too. The legitimate businesses, the transition. That's why they are coming for you now. The old ways have deep roots and violent guardians, Duyun said. Every step toward the light makes me vulnerable to those who profit from darkness.
Then why tell me all this?
Why risk it? He turned his hand over, palm up, not quite holding hers but not pulling away either. Because you're the first person who might actually understand the weight of building something while carrying what you came from. You know what it costs to transform yourself, to become more than what you were born to be. If you believe some transformations require witnesses, someone who sees both who you were and who you're fighting to become, hit subscribe. Only those who've never had to fight for change will scroll past. Sol Gi's birthday dinner was perfect in the way only unrepeatable moments can be. Cora had spent 3 weeks planning the menu, sourcing ingredients from Korea and Georgia both, building a meal that honored where Sol Gi came from and where she'd arrived. Each course was a memory made tangible. Her childhood in Busan, her early years in America, the life she'd built despite everything she'd lost. When Sol Gi tasted the final course, a modernized version of her mother's rice cake recipe, she wept openly. Not the quiet tears from New Year's Eve, but full sobs of joy that shook her small frame while Duyun held her hand and Cora pretended not to see the suspicious brightness in his eyes. "Thank you," Sol Gi said after she'd composed herself, taking Cora's face in both hands. "Thank you for giving me my mother back, even if just for one evening." She kissed Cora's forehead like a blessing, then turned to her son. "I'm tired, my dear. But you and Ms. Williams should talk. You have things to say that I don't need to hear." She left with the quiet certainty of a woman who knew exactly what was happening and approved, her security detail materializing from the shadows to escort her home. Cora and Duyun stood in his penthouse, 60 floors above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows making the lights below look like stars fallen to earth. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken things.
"Stay," Duyun said quietly. "Please.
There are things you need to know before this goes any further." "Before what goes any further?" "Before you decide whether to keep opening the door when I knock." He poured them both whiskey, expensive, smooth, the kind that burned like silk. They sat on opposite ends of his minimalist sofa, the city sprawling beneath them like a kingdom.
"Like a prison."
"I told you I facilitate agreements," Duyun began, his voice carefully controlled.
"That was true but incomplete.
I control the largest Korean organized crime syndicate on the East Coast. My father built it from nothing, protection rackets, gambling, smuggling, everything that exists in the spaces between laws. When he died, I inherited all of it. The businesses, the territory, the enemies, the blood debts that can never be fully paid." Cora's fingers tightened around her glass, but she didn't interrupt. "I've spent the last 7 years and tens of millions of dollars trying to legitimize everything. Transitioning the gambling into legal ventures, the protection into private security, the smuggling into import-export. But every step toward the light makes me vulnerable to those who profit from darkness. To men who see change as betrayal, legitimacy as weakness. The men who came to my restaurant. Among others. I have enemies, Cora.
Real ones.
Dangerous ones. And they'll use anyone I care about as leverage against me." He turned to face her fully, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. "You should walk away. Knowing me, being seen with me, it puts a target on your back. What happened at Harmon was just the beginning." Cora set down her glass and moved closer, close enough to see the conflict warring in his dark eyes. "What do you actually want, Duyun? Not what you inherited. Not what's expected. Not what your father wanted or what your enemies think or what you believe you deserve. What do you want?" The question seemed to break something in him. His shoulders sagged, his carefully maintained control fracturing. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, so quiet she had to lean in to hear. "To be someone my mother doesn't pray for every night." The words hung in the air between them, naked, vulnerable, devastating in their simplicity. "She prays for me," he continued, his eyes fixed on the city below. "Every morning, every evening. She lights incense and prays to our ancestors that her son will find peace. That he'll stop destroying himself. That he'll forgive himself for becoming what he needed to become to keep us safe. Cora took his hand, threading her fingers through his scarred knuckles. Then stop destroying yourself. Let someone help carry the weight. You don't know what you're offering. Then show me. If you believe that the bravest question is asking someone what they want for themselves, not what they owe to others, hit subscribe. Only those who've never dared to want something different will keep scrolling. They came during the Friday dinner rush when Harmon was at capacity, every table full, the kitchen moving with the orchestrated chaos that Cora had spent years perfecting. She was at the pass calling orders when the back door, the reinforced back door with Do-yoon's expensive locks, crashed open.
3 men. Ski masks.
One held Yui at gunpoint while the other 2 moved through her kitchen like they knew exactly what they were doing. Not thieves, destroyers. The first one grabbed Cora's knife collection. Japanese steel she'd spent years acquiring, each blade chosen with the care some people reserved for jewelry, and methodically smashed each one against the prep table. The sound of breaking steel cut through the kitchen like screams. The second went for her range. Her custom 6-burner that she'd saved 3 years to afford, imported from Italy, the heart of her kitchen. He took a crowbar to it, shattering the controls, cracking the cast iron grates, destroying with surgical precision while Cora watched, frozen with a gun pointed at her sous chef's temple. Please, Jinsa whispered, his eyes squeezed shut. Please don't.
The third man pulled out spray paint. Black.
He wrote on her stainless steel walls, Korean characters that looked like they were bleeding, that transformed her pristine kitchen into something violated and wrong. What does it say? Cora demanded, her voice shaking with rage and terror both. What does it say?
Jinsa's face had gone gray.
Tell the prince his crown is made of paper. The man with the spray paint pulled out a phone, tossed it to Cora.
Call him. Now.
Let him hear what happens when he pretends to be something he's not. Cora's hands shook as she dialed the number she'd memorized without meaning to.
Do-yoon answered on the first ring. Harmon. Now.
She didn't recognize her own voice. They are destroying everything. She heard something in the background. Movement, urgency, then his voice, deadly calm.
Are you hurt?
No, but.
Put them on speaker. Don't disconnect.
15 minutes. The men laughed when she did, their voices distorted behind the masks. They continued their systematic destruction, smashing plates, tearing through her spice collection, grinding rare ingredients under their boots while Cora's staff huddled together and the phone transmitted everything.
Do-yoon arrived in 13 minutes. Cora didn't hear him enter.
One moment the men were laughing, and the next, the dining room had gone silent. Completely silent, like someone had pressed mute on the entire restaurant. Then Do-yoon was there with 2 men who cleared the dining room in whispers, ushering terrified customers out through the front while something else happened in the kitchen. What happened next would replay in Cora's nightmares for months.
Do-yoon didn't rush. Didn't shout.
He moved through her destroyed kitchen with the careful precision of a surgeon, and what he did to those 3 men was surgical and terrifying in its efficiency. He disarmed the one holding Yui without a sound, just a movement too fast to follow, and the gun was in his hand, the man's wrist bent at an angle that made Jinsa look away. The other 2 tried to run.
They didn't make it far.
Cora watched Do-yoon dismantle them. That was the only word for it. Dismantle, with brutal efficiency.
No wasted movement.
No excess violence. Just the calculated application of force necessary to break them without killing them, to send a message written in their bones that would be heard by whoever sent them.
He never raised his voice.
Never lost the careful control that somehow made it worse, made it more terrifying than rage would have been. This was a man who knew violence intimately, who wielded it like a tool he'd mastered through practice and necessity. When it was over, when all 3 men were unconscious and his 2 associates were quietly removing them through the back door, Do-yoon turned to Cora. His eyes had gone completely cold, empty of everything except a darkness that made her breath catch.
Now you see, he said quietly. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just a statement of fact.
Then he walked out, leaving Cora standing in the wreckage of her kitchen with the certain knowledge that she'd just witnessed the man he'd been trying to leave behind. If you believe that love means seeing someone's darkness and choosing them anyway, hit subscribe. Only those afraid of the truth will scroll past. The construction crew arrived the next morning before dawn, a full team with equipment that looked more expensive than Cora's entire original kitchen. They worked with quiet efficiency, replacing everything that had been destroyed and upgrading what remained. The new range was commercial-grade, restaurant quality beyond anything she could have afforded in a lifetime. The knife block that appeared held Japanese steel that made her destroyed collection look like practice blades. Do-yoon paid for everything.
But he wouldn't see her.
Cora called his number 17 times in 3 days. It went straight to voicemail, a generic recording, no personal message. She left messages that progressed from grateful to confused to angry to pleading. He didn't return a single one. On the 4th day, Sol Gi appeared at Harmon during the renovation, moving through the construction chaos with the grace of someone used to navigating dangerous spaces. "He won't see me," Cora said without preamble, setting down the sample tiles she'd been reviewing. "He saved my restaurant and then disappeared like I imagined the whole thing." Sol Gi's expression was gentle and infinitely sad. "My son has always protected people by pushing them away. It's the only method he knows." She took Cora's hand, guiding her to sit at the one intact table in the dining room. "He believes his love is a curse that destroys everything it touches. He's watched it happen too many times. Anyone he cares about becomes a target, a weakness his enemies exploit."
"So he just decides for me? Decides I can't handle it?"
"He decides you shouldn't have to." Sol Gi's voice was firm but kind. "I'm sorry, Cora. I'm so sorry my son's world infected your life. You made him believe he could be different, and his enemies punished you for it. He won't forgive himself for that." Cora tried Park International twice more. Both times, Do-yoon security guards, polite, apologetic, but immovable, turned her away at the elevator with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Park isn't available," they said, and something in their eyes told her they'd been instructed to keep her out specifically. She left a final voicemail, her voice raw from crying and shouting both. "You don't get to decide for me what I can handle. You don't get to show me who you are and then disappear because you're afraid. If you want me gone, say it to my face. Otherwise, you're just a coward hiding behind good intentions."
He didn't call back.
Harmon reopened 2 weeks later with a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a Michelin-starred establishment. The new security system had cameras everywhere, panic buttons in every room, reinforced doors that could withstand anything short of explosives. Her staff returned. All of them, even Jin Soo-hood had a gun to his head, but something had changed.
They knew now.
Knew who their chef was connected to, knew what world she'd stepped into, knew that working at Harmon meant accepting a level of danger most restaurant jobs didn't include. Some customers stayed away, frightened by the rumors. Others came specifically because of them, seeking proximity to danger like it was entertainment. The violence had marked Cora in ways that wouldn't wash off. She checked exits compulsively now, noticed who entered her restaurant with an intensity that bordered on paranoia, flinched at loud noises. Her therapist said it was normal, that trauma rewrites your neural pathways. But other memories had marked her too. Do-yoon's hands shaking as he checked her for injuries after the attack, his fingers gentle despite their capacity for brutality. The way he'd whispered something in Korean when he thought she couldn't hear, Jin-soo later translated it as I'm sorry, this is my fault, his voice breaking on words meant only for himself.
The way he'd looked at her before walking out.
Not cold, despite what his eyes had shown. Devastated. Like he was dying and taking the only honorable path he could see. 3 weeks after the attack, Cora stood in her rebuilt kitchen during the quiet hours between lunch and dinner, running her hands over surfaces that Do-yoon's money had transformed. Everything was perfect except the one thing that mattered. She missed him. Missed a man she'd known for barely 2 months, a man who'd brought violence to her door, a man who was probably right that she was better off without him.
But she missed him anyway.
If you believe that sometimes love means fighting for someone even when they've given up on themselves, hit subscribe. Only those who've never had to fight for what matters will keep scrolling.
2 months of silence felt like drowning in slow motion.
Cora had stopped calling after the first month, stopped driving past Park International hoping to catch a glimpse of him. She'd thrown herself into Harmon with the focused intensity of someone using work to avoid thinking about the hollow space where something important used to be. The restaurant thrived, reservations booked 4 months out now, a wait list that grew daily.
Success tasted like ashes.
Then Sol GI appeared after closing on a Tuesday night. Cora was doing inventory when she heard the gentle knock on the locked front door. Through the glass, Sol GI looked smaller than she remembered, older, like the past 2 months had stolen something vital from her.
Cora let her in without a word.
"May I sit?" Sol GI asked, gesturing to the small table in the kitchen alcove, the table her staff now called the Park table with the reverence reserved for sacred spaces or crime scenes. They sat in the silence of the empty restaurant, the city humming outside, the industrial refrigerators providing a low mechanical heartbeat. "My son is destroying himself," Sol GI said without preamble. Her voice was steady but her hands trembled. Not quickly, like his father did.
Slowly. Deliberately.
With the same careful precision he applies to everything else.
Cora's chest tightened.
"What do you mean?" "His consolidating power by eliminating threats with calculated brutality. Becoming the monster he always feared he was, the one his enemies expected him to be." Sol GI's eyes were bright with unshed tears.
His stopped sleeping.
"I hear him at night, pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. His stopped eating the meals I prepare, he used to at least pretend for my sake. His stopped pretending he believes he deserves anything but the violence he was born into." "Why are you telling me this?" Sol GI reached across the table, taking both of Cora's hands in her smaller ones.
Her grip was surprisingly strong.
"Because you made him believe, for the first time in his life, that he could be more than his father's son. You showed him what it looks like when someone builds something beautiful from nothing but will and skill. You made him want to be worthy of something other than fear. And then his enemies destroyed my restaurant because of it."
"Yes. And he can't forgive himself for that." Sol GI's voice broke slightly. "He thinks loving you means letting you go. He thinks protecting you means disappearing from your life."
"But he's wrong, Cora.
He's dying."
"Maybe not physically, not yet, but the man who wanted to be better, who believed he could transform, that man is dying. And what's left is just the monster.
Just the violence.
Just my son punishing himself for wanting what he thinks he can't have." Cora pulled her hands back, pressing them against her face. "What am I supposed to do?"
"He won't see me. Won't talk to me."
"He's made his choice."
"He's made the only choice he thinks protects you."
"But it's the wrong choice." Sol GI reached into her purse and placed something on the table between them, a key card, simple and white, with no markings.
"Access to his penthouse."
"He doesn't know I have a copy."
"I can't just." "You can. And you must decide if you will."
Sol GI stood, moving with the careful grace of someone much older than she'd been 2 months ago.
"Respect his wishes and let him go.
Watch from a distance as he becomes everything he fought against. Or fight for a man who's convinced he's beyond saving, knowing that entering his world again might destroy you both." She walked to the door, then paused, looking back at Cora sitting alone at the Park table with a key card that felt like a grenade. "My son has spent his entire life protecting others by sacrificing himself. Maybe it's time someone protected him instead."
Sol GI's smile was sad and knowing.
"Even if he fights you every step of the way." Then she was gone, leaving Cora with an impossible choice and a key card that seemed to pulse with potential and danger both. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Inside, Cora stared at 10 grams of plastic that could change everything or end everything, knowing that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. If you believe that true love means being willing to fight for someone even when they've stopped fighting for themselves, even when they insist you shouldn't, hit subscribe. Only those who've never loved someone enough to risk everything will keep scrolling. The choice is always ours to make.